Hey, when I say the word Silk Road, what do you picture? I bet it's something like a single epic caravan trail, loaded with silk, snaking its way from China all the way to Rome. But what if I told you that the Silk Road, the one we all have in our heads, never really existed? Yeah? Let's get into it.
Yeah, this is the image, right? It's powerful, it's adventurous, it's the stuff of movies. And it's also, well, mostly a myth. This idea of one long superhighway is a picture that was painted way, way later. The reality was a whole lot messier, and honestly, a lot more interesting.
And here's the real kicker. The name itself, it's pretty new. A German geographer, a guy named Baron Ferdinand von Richthofen, he just made it up in 1877. He was focused on this one specific time period in trade, but the name he came up with, Seidenstrassen, was just so catchy that it stuck. And it kind of flattened this sprawling, thousand-year-old network into one simple idea. So to really understand it, the first thing we have to do is kind of forget the name.
All right, so let's start peeling back the layers of that myth. We're going to move way beyond the idea of a single Silk Road and see what was actually going on. Because it wasn't a road. You know what it was? It was the world's first global circulatory system.
So, what was it really like? Well, for starters, it was this massive, dynamic web of routes on both land and sea that were constantly changing. An empire would rise, a new route would open up, the climate would shift, and a trail would disappear into the desert. Even the name is Eurocentric, right? It focuses on what the West wanted, silk, while totally ignoring what the East was desperate to get its hands on. And we always forget the real heroes of the story, the nomadic peoples who guided the caravans and provided the animals, and these master traders, the Sogdians, who are the true connectors of this ancient world.
Okay, so let's follow the goods. This wasn't just about ancient luxury shopping. The trade humming along these routes was driven by this incredible mix of desire for sure, but also by deep strategic need. This was as much about survival as it was about status.
And you got to ditch that image of one merchant loading up his camels in China and trekking all the way to Rome. That almost never, ever happened. Think of it more like a relay race. A merchant would haul his goods to a big oasis city, sell them to another trader, who'd take them to the next hub, and on it went. And at every single stop, the price went up, so by the time something got to the other end of the world, it was worth an absolute fortune.
And it was absolutely a two-way street. Of course, we all know about the silk, the porcelain, the spices that went west, but look at what was flowing back east. You had these legendary, heavenly horses from Central Asia, incredible Roman glassware, tons of gold and silver to pay for everything, and even stuff that changed daily culture, like grapes and the secret to making wine.
And this gets right to the heart of why this whole network even started. For China, the big push to open these routes wasn't about selling silk at all. It was pure national security. They needed bigger, stronger horses from Central Asia to build a cavalry that could actually stand up to the nomadic horsemen on their borders. For Rome, on the other hand, it was pure luxury. Silk was the ultimate status symbol. So popular, it was draining the empire of its gold and causing a huge moral panic.
You can really feel the Roman anxiety about silk right here. The philosopher Seneca the Younger was basically scandalized by it. He saw it as a sign of moral decay, a threat to everything that made Rome great. But you know what? Despite the outrage and the massive trade deficit, the demand was completely unstoppable. And that tension is what fueled this network for hundreds of years.
But you know, the most world-changing things that moved along these routes weren't things you could touch or weigh. The same caravans that carried treasure also carried beliefs, philosophies, and new religions. This was a commerce of the soul, and its impact was way, way bigger than any bolt of silk.
And the single biggest idea to travel these routes? Buddhism. Its journey is just incredible. It starts out in India, then it gets carried by monks and merchants into the heart of Central Asia. From there, it makes the jump into China along the Silk Road, and once it's in China, it completely transforms, eventually spreading to influence all of East Asia, from Korea to Japan.
And Buddhism wasn't the only one. You had Nestorian Christians, Manichaeans, and later Muslim merchants all using this same network. But here's the really clever part, the way they succeeded. They didn't just show up and start preaching, they adapted. The Nestorians used Buddhist ideas to explain Christianity. Manichaeism was this brilliant blend of three different religions. It was sophisticated cultural translation happening in real time.
And there's the terrifying flip side to all this connection. The very thing that made the routes work so well, especially during the Mongol Empire when travel was safer than ever, also made them a terrifyingly efficient highway for disease. We now think the Black Death that devastated Europe traveled west right along these protected trade routes. It's a chilling reminder that networks carry everything, the good and the very, very bad.
But it wasn't just goods and ideas. This network was also a one-way superhighway for foundational technologies that flowed almost entirely from east to west, technologies that would eventually go on to reboot the entire planet.
First up, paper, an invention from China. Suddenly, knowledge wasn't heavy and expensive written on stone or animal skins. It was light, cheap, and portable. When paper reached the Islamic world, it helped fuel a golden age of science and learning. Without paper, the mass spread of ideas is basically impossible.
Now add printing to that. Again, developed in China centuries before Gutenberg. You take cheap paper and you combine it with the ability to mass-produce books and texts. That's not just an invention, that's a revolution just waiting to happen. It's what eventually leads to the Reformation and the scientific revolution in Europe.
Then you have the compass. It started in China as a tool for divination, believe it or not, for arranging spaces harmoniously. But it was adapted for navigation at sea. Once Arab traders passed it along, it gave European sailors the confidence to leave the coastline and sail into the open ocean. No compass, no age of discovery. It's that simple.
And finally, gunpowder, another Chinese invention. It was spread westward by the Mongols, and it changed warfare forever. Suddenly, giant castle walls were useless. It gave rise to huge, centralized gunpowder empires. The point is, these weren't just clever gadgets. They were the fundamental technologies that built the modern world.
So if this network was so incredibly powerful, why did it decline? Why did it just fade away? Well, this brings us to the final amazing paradox of the Silk Road. It was, in a very real way, a victim of its own success.
So here's how it happened. On the one hand, you had big political shifts. The Mongol Empire fell apart, making the land routes way more dangerous. But the real story is what the Silk Road had already delivered to Europe. It had given them an insatiable appetite for Eastern goods. It had given them the stories of Marco Polo, whispering of unbelievable riches. And most importantly, it had given them the key piece of technology they needed to bypass the old routes entirely, the compass. The network literally delivered the tools and the motivation for its own extinction.
So the ancient caravan trails slowly faded back into the desert sands. But the human drive behind it all, that impulse to connect, to trade, to exchange, to see what's over the next horizon, that never went away. Today you see huge global projects that are literally called the New Silk Road, made of steel rails and fiber optic cables, which really leaves you with one final thought. Maybe the routes change, but the global Silk Road, well, that's a journey that never truly ends.